Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Scientists on both sides of Lake Champlain are joining together to study a growing problem that is already documented in the world's oceans. Researchers at SUNY Plattsburgh and the University of Vermont Sea Grant program want to understand more about a potential threat to human health and aquatic life. Across the Fence's Rebecca Gowan has our report.
There's a mystery in Lake Champlain.
Is it a film? Is it a bead? Is it a fiber, fragment, foam?
It is tiny pieces of plastic that researchers started noticing in the early 2000s, first in ocean waters and later in the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain.
These particles are less than 5 millimeters in size.
That's smaller than a pencil eraser.
The first project, and probably the longest running, was the wastewater treatment plant processing.
Danielle Garneau is a professor of environmental science at SUNY Plattsburgh. She's leading a study investigating the distribution of the plastic particles, or microplastics, around the lake, both in the water and also in the animals who live here.
We've got invertebrates, macroinvertebrates. We've got 14 species of fish, and our top predator would be the cormorants. And so these are all the lake species we worked with, about 19 species, 14 species specifically are fish.
The research started several years ago, testing water that was treated at the local wastewater treatment facility.
We started doing wastewater treatment plant surveys at the Plattsburgh City plant. We basically will go out with a 355 micron sieve, and we'll place it under a hose that's pulling water from the last portion of processing at a plant right before it goes out into the lake.
The study recently expanded from Plattsburgh to include wastewater treatment plants in Burlington and St. Albans, with Garneau's team taking samples weekly at each location, as well as several sites within the lake.
As you can see from these pie charts, we're getting a lot of fragments. That's in orange here. And this is 2015 and 16 samples.
One concern is that accumulation of the microplastics in larger fish and predators will have a negative impact on their health.
A lot of these plastics have plasticizers and other additional additives, the BPA, and so on. And those things, are they leaching out into the other tissues, making it through the bloodstream, and impacting neurologically? And again, early findings in many organisms are showing some signs that these aren't necessarily a healthy thing for these organisms.
Another piece of the puzzle is determining exactly what kind of plastic each tiny particle came from in the first place.
There's so many thousands of kinds of plastics that are out there, different polymers, different types of plastics. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the meander is really that S shape that rivers are going to create.
Chris Stepanuck is a professor and researcher at the University of Vermont. She's part of the Lake Champlain Sea Grant, which is funding Garneau's research on microplastics.
What Danielle is finding is that the dominant kind of plastics or microplastics in the lake are fibers. So those are coming from textiles, maybe like our fleece jackets, or from ropes or other plastic materials that are used in the lake or fishing or something like that. And then we also know that she's looking at wastewater treatment plant outfalls, and that these microplastics are making their way through the wastewater treatment plants and out into the lake.
Garneau's team is also going back to older lake water samples to figure out exactly when the different microplastics started showing up. Knowing the time frame will help them identify where some of the particles are coming from. One source researchers have pinpointed is washing machines.
One of the things that we've learned through different research studies is that different kinds of materials, and this is again the fibers being the most prevalent in Lake Champlain, When they're washed, they're shedding off pieces of plastic, and that's getting, again, through the wastewater treatment system and out into the lake.
The wastewater treatment facilities are not doing anything wrong. They're simply not set up to deal with such small particles. And while a few fibers getting free during a wash may not seem like a big deal, studies have shown that an average size load of polyester cotton blend could release an estimated 137,000 fibers. Acrylic material, one of the worst offenders, can shed over 700,000 of the microscopic plastic fibers per load.
You know, even though when we look at our sieve, when we pull it, it doesn't seem like a lot, you can imagine when we, extrapolate out to, based on flow rates and thinking about other plants that would be contributing as well, this may become a larger problem in the lake.
So what can we do?
So what we can do is a few things. One is thinking about using fewer plastics. So what kinds of action might we have in our lives that uses plastic? We go to the grocery store. Maybe we don't use the plastic bags. Those are films, which would be called microplastic films. If a plastic bag breaks apart. She's not seeing those in huge numbers, but that's still an action we can take.
There are some products hitting the market that address the problem, like Patagonia's Guppy Friend washing bag and the Cora Ball from the Vermont-based Rosalia project. Long-term solutions could include working with washing machine manufacturers and retrofitting wastewater treatment plants to capture the smaller particles.
So in terms of what our role can be, just choosing to use alternatives or less plastic. Don't use the straws, switch over to more natural products when we're choosing face wash and toothpaste. Be a more aware consumer. That certainly is one of them. Maintenance of our outerwear and our synthetic clothing. And also, if you are out on the lake a lot, making sure that your equipment is up to speed and you're not working with frayed ropes and those sorts of things.
Solving a mystery and rethinking our relationship with the plastic we use and wear.
Can we win the war on microplastics? It's going to be challenging.
These researchers are up for the challenge and on the case. In Burlington, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next segment focuses on farming and climate change. Experts at UVM's Center for Sustainable Agriculture say farmers will need resilient systems in order to stay economically viable in the face of increased precipitation, more extreme storms, and warming temperatures. The center has produced a series of videos from around the Northeast that focus on farming and climate change. For our first segment, we cross the Connecticut River to go to a family-owned vegetable and fruit farm in Plainfield, New Hampshire.
One of the things that I have noticed is the violence of the weather. Thunderstorms are much more violent, much windier, much more electricity. Hail is a real good indication that something is afoot. 25 years ago, if there was a hail event in New Hampshire, it would be newsworthy. Now every storm that passes through here has potential for hail. And we live on broken glass in the spring when the blueberries are sizing up and we're about ready to pick strawberries. And they say a frontal system's coming through, potential hail. I don't take it lightly anymore. I get prepared for the worst. The other thing we do, I think that reflects an acknowledgement of climate change is we do seem to be going more and more towards protected growing, high tunnel greenhouses per se. There is the benefit of season extension, and you capitalize on that, but the high tunnel and greenhouses are controlled environments to some degree, and so there's less, disease issues within. If there's a hail event, you have protection, that kind of thing. And so you do consider, as time goes on, more and more. We started out with 3 or 4 greenhouses for the ornamentals, and all of a sudden there's 26 on this place. And a lot of that has to do with we're putting more of our crops under greenhouse cultivation. This year is an extreme drought for us. If you just walk across the street and look at the river right now, you'll see that you could literally walk across the Connecticut River to Vermont or wade without too much problem. It gets harder and harder for us to draw water from these sources. You would think that if you had the Connecticut River in your backyard, you would have ultimate water, and you don't. I kind of operate from the assumption that everything I'm doing is bad for the soils. You know, every time I put a plow down, every time I take the disc harrows out, every time I take the spader out, it doesn't matter. It's all, you know, it's contrary to what would happen there in a natural ecosystem. So I'm just trying to do everything I can to ameliorate what I'm doing to the soils. And to that end, I think, you know, we try to keep everything covered. We're getting, like right now, we're trying to get ready to get our winter cover crops on. And you'll see some open stuff like that out here that's very open now, but in, you know, hopefully by 15th of September, it'll be green again. A lot of times we plant certain crops, permanent crops, I say permanent crop, you know, crops that are going to be there for the season, the tomatoes and stuff, and we'll do white clover walkways. I have to mow it and maintain it, but I'm not burning up humus or organic content by running cultivators through it periodically. It gets tilled once a year, and that's it. I used to love recreational tillage. You know, you get out there, you hit it with the bush hog in the fall, and then you take all that stover and you beat the shit out of it, and it looks great. The field looks pretty. But in reality, it's not good for the soil. I mean, so now, if I go in after a cornfield, I'll bush hog it, and bush hog it pretty high, but just enough so I'll spin winter rye on it, and then I'll just cuff it enough to chop and knock down the corn, and just kick a little dirt onto that winter rye, you know, just, you know, half an inch to an inch of the soil. And it looks like the dickens, but the winter rye will catch, and I'm not, you know, ripping up a bunch of stuff. We're very fortunate after 43 years and some amount of profitability, we have a wide array of tools. So we've got a lot of choices and a lot of options. The main thing to do is when something needs tillage, you know, my mindset is like, how can I achieve the least amount of damage to soil structure? You know, we try to reduce steel in the field as much as possible.
Our thanks to Edgewater Farm. And once again, thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.